first. Let's talk about the political dimension. When you have to have Kim Jong-Un pop up to show that you have a friend, uh, well, you're in a pretty desperate situation. He's not exactly the most internationally welcomed leader. And so I think the political significance only, less than a day after Vladimir Putin posed with the Turkish leader, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, in Sochi, only a day after that PR opportunity effectively flopped. Now it's like, well, we're not even going to keep it a secret now that we may be considering openly taking military supplies from North Korea. Why is that significant? One is, well, it really establishes that Putin is increasingly isolated, not welcomed on the international front. And two, again, if you're having to go to North Korea for weapons, when you supposedly had the second largest army in the world when you invaded Ukraine, you're not exactly doing that well in terms of the resources and the manpower for your invasion 18 months after you launched it.
Yeah, so it sends quite a message. And talking also of that meeting in Sochi, it looked as if Putin was seeking someone to listen to his grievances, despite the fact that he was the one that pulled the plug on this really important grain deal.
He needed Erdogan to show that he wasn't isolated because, again, Bev, you and I have talked about the failed gambles that Putin has made throughout this invasion. And when he pulled out of the grain deal in July and followed that up by stepping up the bombing of Ukraine's ports and its grain facilities, it was another failed gamble. What Putin had wanted to do was to bring African leaders to St. Petersburg a few weeks later and say, look, we're going to give you grain. We'll give you debt relief. We will give you development aid. Aren't we the wonderful people in this conflict? Only 17 of 54 African leaders showed up. And many of those who did show said, get back in the deal. That's what we really want. So when that backfired, Putin, who had actually held off meeting Erdogan, shifted his tune because any diplomatic port in a storm right now, and Vladimir Putin is at home and in Ukraine caught up in quite a storm.
Yeah. So is Ukraine. When you think too that Parliament tonight has formalised the dismissal of the Defence Minister who's presided over this war. Was this a tough call for President Zelensky to make?
It was a necessary call for President Zelensky. And I think there's a very difference when we talk about what Ukraine has done versus the instability in Russia. In Ukraine, the cause of Alexei Reznikov, the defense minister, going was the ongoing question of corruption. Now, Zelensky has made it a priority since he was elected to fight corruption on the domestic front. And of course, it's very important if Ukraine wants to join the European Union and other international bodies that you continue to show that. Reznikov survived a corruption scandal at the start of the year when the defense ministry, some of the staff were caught taking bribes for tenders for food supplies. But the second scandal, which brewed a few weeks ago, which is that 1 million rations for troops were subpar, and again came from a tender that had been improperly handled. No, there's no way you could keep him. I think he'll get another post. He could well be the ambassador to Washington for Ukraine, but you needed to show with his replacement, Mr. Umarov, that you have got competence at the head of the defense ministry, but you also have clean hands.
What will this shake-up mean for Ukraine's offensive that this week reportedly made some really quite significant breakthroughs?
I think, and it's interesting that Vladimir Zelensky was on the front lines yesterday, both in the south and the east of the country, that you're going to have a show, and actually the substance of continuity. Reznikov has been important for mobilizing international aid for Ukraine's forces, but his successor will be as well. And the key thing here is nothing succeeds like success. And after 3 months of this counteroffensive, to break the main Russian defense line in Zaporizhia region, the defense line to which 60% of Russia's month-long fortifications have been devoted, that's big. There are still the second and third lines to get through. We are talking about an offensive that will go into 2024. But you really have seen now that, yes, far from sort of the hand-wringing that there was a failed counteroffensive, Russian propaganda was saying it, its supporters were saying this in the West, even some U.S. officials, far from that occurring, Ukraine, at a great cost, but Ukraine is succeeding in finally wearing down the Russian resistance.
Yeah, but as you point out, at a great cost. The casualties are really quite awful for this country to even contemplate.
again, Bev, I'm going to put it down to a fundamental that when, we're pundits and analysts and journalists outside of Ukraine and we can go through this, but the starting point is, do Ukrainians want their country back? Do they want to carry that cost? And although men from the front line will report back that they have taken these losses, they will repeatedly say, but we know why we're doing this. Australia's been through wars before. The UK's been through wars before where there have been great sacrifices, but this is happening on Ukrainian territory. And far be it from me to say that you're taking too many losses, you need to stop. Ukrainians, as they try to liberate their territory, they're the ones whose, resistance we have to respect.
Yeah. Again, back to Russia, and which is what a week or so after Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner Group, and two of his key lieutenants were killed in a plane crash. The general who disappeared from view after the Wagner mutiny, the Russian general, has resurfaced. Does this mean Putin's forgiven him?
It wasn't just a Russian general, Bev. It was a former commander of the invasion of Ukraine, Sergei Surovikin. And he had continued to command Russia's aerospace forces, but he was seen as being close to Prigozhin. So whether or not he knew about the rebellion, eventually he had to go. He was put under house arrest reportedly. He was relieved of his command at the head of aerospace forces. But this photo yesterday, which Russian officials, I think, clearly wanted to leak out, is, okay, you get to live, at least for now. And that does show, I think they're trying to say, we've put a line under this mutiny. We still control Wagner's empire. We control its resources. We will still have our presence in Africa and the Middle East, but we can now get beyond Prigozhin. Let's all refocus on the battle inside Ukraine. And indeed, they need to do that for obvious reasons.
Indeed. Always great to get your thoughts, Scott. Good to talk.
Thank you, Beth.